funds in order to engage everybody in co-designing the transitions to sustainable shipping. And it is quite important to engage everybody from the start so that they have ownership of the solution and we integrate all clever ideas and investments in the pathway that has to be constructed in order to help the industry transform into a sustainable industry. At the moment, we are in discussions with the EIT Climate Kick Ports Loops project, which is a project that tries to include all ports within Europe and outside to implement a circular economy. And we also started talking with the Getting to Zero Coalition, which again is a coalition that tries to sketch the roadmap to sustainable shipping. Sustainable shipping...
Phoebe, the time is over.
Oh, okay. Oh, dear. Okay, give me half a minute.
1 minute.
Sustainable shipping is not about the economy and the society only, but it is relevant to the ship owners as well, because they are greatly affected by the increased frequency and increased extent of extreme weather events. So they are already asking what is going on there. They are already asking how insurance will shape up with regards to their business, and the principles for sustainable insurance are becoming quite relevant to this industry as well. Very, very quickly, I'm just gonna say that we run as a partnership between SDSN Greece and ETI Climate Kick Greece that I direct many projects relevant to shipping, relevant to ports, trying to sketch the sustainability roadmap, and we use a systems innovation approach, this innovation that aims to change underlying structure of the system, not just individual parts. And if I refer to some of them, is circular economy integrated with a smart specialization of each and every country, including the shipping industry. This Resilient Maritime Hubs project, which is a deep demonstration going into the ports, which are hubs for shipping and sustainable tourism and sustainable movement of goods. And we are trying to identify decarbonization pathways and implement this within these ports. And I'm gonna close by saying, look at the Loops Ports initiative of EIT, Climate Kick, 450 ports, 7 business models, 3 training pilots, 1 big web tool to try to identify the opportunities of circular economy within ports that are crucial for shipping and create a network that will mobilize the change towards sustainable ports and shipping. Thank you.
Thank you, Phoebe. Your presentation confirmed that it's very complex to decarbonize the shipping. Okay, João Manuel Vassallo, professor at Civil Engineering School and involved in Transportation Research Center here in Politecnica Universidad of Madrid. Please, José.
So thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. It is a pleasure to be in such an interesting conference, good conference at my own university, the UPM. I am professor here at the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid at the Transport Research Center. So there are many points that have been already highlighted by previous people, so I will try to focus on the new aspects that maybe haven't been treated. So first, here you have a graph of how is decarbonizing transport so important. First of all, this graph shows the evolution in the EU from 1990 to the present. You see that all the sectors went down in terms of emissions, but transport is the only one that has grown. And this is because it is the most difficult one to decarbonize because it is very hardly dependent on fossil fuels. In terms of different transportation means, you see that the road is the most important one at the EU level, 71%, followed by aviation and shipping. However, what I want to highlight is that despite the fact that aviation is pretty small, it is the one that has experienced the highest growth. It almost doubled in the last 30 years. And this is not so much because of the efficiency of the planes, but also because of the growth on demand. If we focus on the road sector and we make the analysis sorted by type of vehicles, we see that cars in Europe are the most important ones, but you see also that heavy and light-duty vehicles, they play an important role at the time of decarbonizing. And I want also to highlight that the greatest growth has been experienced by light-duty vehicles. So what solutions do we have to decarbonize? So I want to make a distinction between three different aspects. First, we can act on mobility. One possibility is let's reduce mobility. Another, shift to cleaner modes or take better advantage of the capacity of the vehicles. The second is on the energy side, by increasing energy efficiency in the whole life cycle and also shift to low or zero carbon technologies. And finally, in order to boost the mobility and energy aspects, it is important to use market instruments through higher carbon prices, taxes, incentives to innovation, and different types of actions that may incentivize companies and people to move towards a cleaner transport in the world. So the first question I have is it possible to reduce mobility? So that's a very good issue because maybe we are moving too much, not just in terms of climate change, but also in terms of pollution, congestion, and things like that. The thing is that it is complicated, reducing mobility is pretty complicated without compromising quality of life. I mean, as people become wealthier, they want to move more and more, and they have greater necessities. So we have to act in the market side in order to regulate that. Then it is right that some economies, they show a trend towards decoupling mobility and GDP. Some traditional actions, such as promoting teleworking, teleconferences, urban densification, incentives to live close to the workplace, they are measures that can be effective, but in the last few years, they have failed. And also, we have to pay attention to some breakthrough innovations, such as 3D printing, that can reduce very much the need to move freight over different places. Then, shifting to other modes is the solution. So it is complicated. Taking a look at Europe, that is one of the areas of the world that is putting a much greater stress on reducing CO2, we see that the modal change has been very slight. In the case of freight, it even increased by 5 points. And in the case of passenger, even though there was a slight reduction in passengers, you see that air transportation has almost doubled. So the thing is that there are different modes, such as road transport for last mile, aviation for intercontinental trips, and ship for crossing the ocean, that they have little competition. It is the only way, really, to get to this point. Then, another point is taking a better advantage of the capacity of the vehicles. And in terms of mobility, of passenger mobility, it is right that there is a trend to share. We are noticing that new generations, they are used not to buy new cars, and they share electric cars and carpooling. There are plenty of applications that are facilitating that. Then ICT, through mobility as a service, will be able to reduce and to make trips more efficient and to combine personal and public transportation. And then we have the possibility of making larger vehicles. This is particularly important in the case of freight. Larger vehicles are more energy efficient. Then increased efficiency and we are going to the field of energy, is also a crucial aspect. Here you have a slide I took from the European Environmental Agency that basically shows that if the generation mix is not renewable, we have a big problem, because the electric vehicle will be producing more CO2 if the generation is 1% carbon, and almost the same CO2 if there is a mix of renewable and fossil fuel generation than a conventional vehicle. So to me, one of the key aspects that have been stressed by some of the previous speakers is the development of energy storage technologies. At the end of the day, this is the crucial aspect to take advantage of renewable energy, because we may have an electric car and we have the impression that this car doesn't produce any CO2, but actually, if the source that is generating electricity is producing CO2, we are not solving the problem. Then, shift to low carbon technologies. There has been a lot already said in this conference and in this roundtable about it. So what I want to stress is that at the end of the day, the shift needs good infrastructure for recharging. And also the big issue is with the big vehicles, basically planes and trucks, because the weight and the size of the batteries means a real issue for heavy vehicles. There are some initiatives, such as promoting dynamic charging in the road, but this requires autonomous vehicles and new infrastructure design. Of course, there are other options, such as hydrogen and biofuels, that may play an important role. And finally, I wanted to say something about economic incentives, because at the end of the day, this is the things how real economy works. So you have boosting technology means applying economic incentives. So a first comment I may have is that the current mechanisms of cut and trade is somehow not the most effective one. First, because it doesn't reflect the marginal damage produced by GHG emissions. Then, because it is not applicable to all sectors. So in this respect, a good GHG pricing should be harmonized across transport modes in order to make competition efficient, proportional to carbon emissions, so in order that those modes or those means of transport emitting a larger amount of CO2 should pay more, and then applicable to all countries and sectors, and equal to the marginal damage. Of course, we can debate then, this is complicated to apply from one day to the next day, because it has a lot of implication in terms of the balance across rich and poor countries, but this is definitely one of the key aspects to consider. And finally, we could use all the money, or at least part of the money that we get from those market-based incentives to promote innovation, because at the end of the day, the key of decarbonization is to make progress on some of the innovation aspects. Things such as batteries production capacity and recycling, hydrogen, alternative fuels for aviation, dynamic charging in the road, or other aspects that are not directly related to mobility, but may have a large impact on reducing mobility, such as 3D printing in order to approach production and consumption, things such as automation that can increase quite a lot the efficiency of mobility, or synchromodality in the case of freight, in order to take advantage of the capacity of the vehicles and in order to combine different types of different transportation modes according to the reduction of CO2 emissions may highly contribute to improve the process. So thank you very much, and if you have any question after, please let me know.
Thank you, Jose. And now our final panelist, Johanna Christensen. The stage is yours. Is Managing Director and of Project Programs of the Global Maritime Forum. Please. Do you want to stay here?
Yeah. I don't have any slides, and I'm also very conscious of the fact that I'm the last speaker standing between you all and the lunch that is out there. So I'll keep it quite short. I'm also quite fortunate that some of the previous speakers have covered not only the scale of the challenge, but also some of the technical solutions that are available. I work for the Global Maritime Forum. I was part of founding the Global Maritime Forum. It's a global platform for collaboration for the maritime sector. And of course, shipping decarbonization is the biggest challenge that we're facing, and thus one of the biggest issues that we're also tackling as a Global Maritime Forum. Phoebe also already spoke quite a bit about shipping emissions and the types of technical solutions that are available, and that is incredibly important, of course. But really what shipping decarbonization and the challenge of shipping decarbonization to me has uncovered is that in addition to being a technical challenge, it is most of all a collective action challenge. And that's why we set up something called the Getting to Zero Coalition and launched it in September at the UN Climate Action Summit in New York. So the Getting to Zero Coalition is a coalition of stakeholders from across the maritime spectrum, the energy sectors, and many other related industries working together specifically on getting zero-emission vessels operating on deep-sea trade routes by 2030. So that's the goal that, that Phoebe articulated, so that needs to be achieved in order to decarbonize shipping by 2050. So at present, we have 105 companies, international institutions, various organizations, knowledge partners, academic institutions, etc., as well as 14 supporting governments working together on developing a transition strategy for this sector. And the way that that works more specifically is really in instigating a number of different types of collaboration. First of all is cross-industry collaboration. So maritime sector working together with the energy sector on figuring out what are going to be those fuels of the future. There's good academic research that points towards hydrogen-based fuels, ammonia, et cetera, being possible solutions, as well as biofuels being good transition solutions. But in fact, none of these have been tested yet, and none of these exist in any quantities that are really will make them applicable to shipping as we know it today. So working together with the energy sector on figuring out what those fuels are going to be and how to bring them on board ships in a technical, feasible, and safe way. Working together with ports and infrastructure developers in order to understand how do we make those fuels available along those deep sea trade routes. It's no use that we have a fuel available in the port of Rotterdam and again in Shanghai, but nowhere in between, because that ship is going to run out of fuel if it has to trade along those routes. Working together with the cargo owners. So some of those cargo owners can be oil and gas companies, they can be big agricultural producers, they can be mining companies, but they can also be consumer brands such as H&M, IKEA, and Unilever, who are incredibly important in sending demand signals to the industry that there's a market for sustainable transport and for zero-emission transport. Working together with the financial sector in figuring out how do we finance this transition. This is a $1 trillion transition that needs to happen over the next 20 to 30 years. I can safely say that it's not going to be the maritime sector alone that can carry that cost. It needs to be working together with other sectors and with the financial sector in figuring out how do we invest in an efficient way and in a good way that doesn't punish the first movers and de-risk some of those early investments that are much more risky than later investments once we know what the technologies are going to be, et cetera. The second type of collaboration is public-private collaboration. As both of the previous speakers alluded to, the biggest thing that stands in the way of this actually happening is regulatory frameworks. A lot of analysis has been done on some of the fuels, and just for example, ammonia, which is one of the candidate fuels for shipping, is likely to be between 2 and 4 times more expensive than conventional fuels. How do we cover that competitiveness gap? So a carbon levy or a price on carbon is definitely a good measure, but there are other potential measures that are in play. So the sector and the Getting to Zero Coalition is really focused on how can we engage with regulators to figure out what are the most efficient and fair regulatory systems that can be applied to the sector so that we make this transition possible and close that competitiveness gap between the transitional fuels and the future fuels. And then finally is what we call sort of the innovative partnerships. So a lot can be done in sort of hypothetically, I guess, or in sort of on paper. But in order to get zero-emission vessels operating on deep-sea trade routes, we need to get it off the drawing board and into the water. And so much of the sort of the technology development and diffusion has to happen actually in real-life pilots and projects and that sort of thing. And so a lot of what we're focused on is how can we facilitate those types of collaborations so that we turn ideas into action.
Thank you, Anna. If you are still alive, really a very quick question to our panelists, because my curiosity is very high with so important panelists. So, Teresa, in your slides, we have seen that Iberia will reduce the CO2 emission to 20% in 2030, mainly changing the fleet with the new Airbus 350. So 2% each year. And from 2030 to 2050, 100% of reduction of CO2, no? So zero CO2 emission. But how is possible? Because in my idea, the only solution is to shift to a biofuel, synthetic fuel, and so on. So the question is, but is it really possible to arrive to 2050 to CO2 emission in your company?
Well, I don't know. We're gonna try. No, as I explained, it's a combination of measures, of course, and of course the fleet renewal is it's a very important measure, and this will make our flights much more efficient, of course. But it's not just that. There's a lot of other measures that I explained. And we also count on new technology that will arrive in those years. It's not just that everything is invented already. So we think that this scenario will get better within the next years. So that's what we know it's going to happen at this point. But we think with the correct signals and the partnerships that we need to make, and of course the collaboration of the administrations. It's not just the 2030 agenda is something that we have to do together, everybody, not just the private sector. So in order to achieve that super challenging goal, we need not just new technology and investment that we're doing, but also the collaboration of the other actors.
Yeah. It's surely a super challenging goal. You say, in your presentation, you discuss about cap and trade and other forms of regulatory interview. But in my experience, the cap and trade can work. For example, the new regional trains in Italy, electrical in substitution to electrical, reduced 30% of efficiency and gain 200 millions of white certificates. And the possibility to use cap and trade pushed a lot of the industry to produce efficiency of the train. But it's clear that we need carbon tax. And only looking at Europe, we have only 11 countries with carbon tax. So the question is very difficult. For example, in my country, there is not, in Italy, there is not carbon tax. It's a disaster. And no, because the politics are not strong enough to say to all the people, we need carbon tax. So, in your opinion, which is the solution? Is it necessary that United Nations, Europe, and others push a lot for carbon tax or not?
Yeah, this is a very good question, and I think that the main problem that we have with CO2 emissions is the fact that the problem is global, so the solution should be taken at the global stage, but it happens that it is the interests of different countries are extremely different, no? Because there are rich countries, there are people with a lot of money to do things, people with not. No? So I mean, Of
Also
course,
inside the country.
inside a certain country, and the influence they may have in different types of industries, things like that are extremely complicated. So what I think, and this is something I want to introduce, that what we have to do in this type of policies is to send signals to the market, no? So maybe we shouldn't say that tomorrow we are going to do something, but because that's impossible. But if we start agreeing that we have to move towards a carbon tax, and this carbon tax has to be applicable everywhere, because one of the main problems of transport is that we have carbon taxes for planes in some places. But for instance, for the road sector, there is no carbon tax, but there is a fuel tax that at the end of the day is a tax as well. So I think that it is good to harmonize everything in the way of leaving the market to work together. The main problem, and I fully agree with you, is how to implement that. That's the difficult thing. And I think that the greatest problem is across wealthy and poor, and or more developed and less developed countries. No? Let's ask Vietnam, that is basically basing its economy in manufacturing things and bringing them here, and maybe without much care about CO2 for the time being, that they have to implement the same carbon tax that any developed country. So I think that this is complicated. So I think that a second best solution is the carbon trade system that is being implemented, cap and trade. And cap and trade works, as you mentioned. It is being effective to do the thing, no? But the problem is that cap and trade is not acknowledging the fact that CO2 problem is a global problem. And if we don't go to a global carbon tax, at the end of the day, we are moving the problem from one place to the other. We are moving the garbage from one country to the other. So my conscience is very clean because I'm doing that, but I'm moving the problem somewhere else. So I don't know maybe the pace to do it, but at least we have to acknowledge that we have to start thinking to move towards this type of approaches. Huh?
Surely this is one of the most important goals of meeting like COP, because we have to find a solution for all. And talking about shipping, do you think, the question is for both, do you think that it's really possible to strongly reduce the CO2 emission in shipping without impact on the price of goods, on the economy, and because this is, of course,
yeah, this is important. You cannot kill the economy to sustain.
Kill completely.
To sustain something else. So if the question is difficult, but the answer, I think, could be given by looking at the energy sector. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you told somebody that the prices of fossil fuel will be competitive to the prices of renewable energy, they would laugh. And now it is the case. So it's a matter of serious investment in research and technology to mobilize the technological innovations and produce cheap enough technologies for CO2 emissions reductions. It can happen. The technology advancement can happen very fast as long as it is subsidized and it is correctly mobilized. And with regards to soft solutions like ETS and carbon taxes, they are both trying to do the same thing. They are trying to add the external cost of emissions to those that are producing it. But they need to be designed cleverly. There are over 50 different ETS and carbon taxes around the world. Very few are successful. Which carbon taxes are successful? Switzerland and in Scandinavia. Why? Because you have big political trust between the people and the government, low corruption, and clever recycling of the money of the tax. The money is earmarked to those that pay the tax. It goes back to them to invest on additional innovations and solutions. So you need to cleverly design these things. Yellow vests have a point. The tax in France was very badly designed. You cannot use people as sitting ducks. You need to make available the option, the cleaner option, before you tax the people. You have to make available the choice of the correct pathway before you start using taxes and ETS, because then they are perceived as punishment. And I talk too much always.
Thank you.
Maybe I'd like to reframe the questions in the sense that I agree with you. Yes, there's a regulatory framework and there's a cost associated, et cetera. But I think we should be looking at this from an opportunity perspective as well. There is a tremendous development opportunity associated with some of these new fuels that are potentially coming into play. Chile, the minister who was here earlier, spoke of the abundant renewable energy that Chile can tap into. Some of that abundant energy will be used locally, but some of that may be turned into the future fuels that we're going to use across industrial sectors, including aviation, shipping, cement, steel, and many other sectors. This is a huge export opportunity for those countries who have this, and the great thing about renewable energy, it's available to economies who currently do not have that kind of export opportunity. So I would think about it from an opportunity perspective, not only from the cost perspective.
Thank you very much for all, and good lunch to everybody.
What a morning, eh? We already went through different stages, if you remember. We started with the importance of the crisis, the political challenges, examples of actions, political actions, the importance of having a plan, and we actually developed a roadmap session. And we started in the how, not the technology. 2 sessions already developed to that. What a morning. I think we all deserve a break. It's time for this lunch break, and remember to get your headphones if you need for the translations of the Spanish speakers only. Thank you.
Okay. So we expect everybody to be back in the auditorium by 2:30, okay? So let's try to catch up our delay and be back in the scheduled hour. Thank you.